Okay, I entitled my life story, God Will Not Let Us Go. As I contemplated on the things I wanted to share, a reoccurring theme kept coming up. God has been a constant in my life, even when I did not want to acknowledge him. But God moves in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. What I plan to share this morning is not always pleasant, but it is my story. I was born of godly parents, pass that around, who strive their entire lives to impress the importance of God in our lives and who worked mightily to improve our chances for success. My mother's side, my maternal grandmother was born in Nova Scotia. From her, I inherited my love for games. She had a stroke that left her bedridden and she died at the age of 57. My maternal grandfather was born in New York. When he was diagnosed with stomach cancer, he walked to Independence to seek a healing from the leaders of the church. It must have worked. He lived to be 93. After marriage, my grandparents followed the church itinerary, living first in New York, the Finger Lakes area, then to Kirtland, where my mother's only sister was married at age 18 on her graduation day, and the rest of the family moved to Nauvoo the next morning. They were active in the Nauvoo congregation, and often visiting ministers were invited for Sunday lunch or as overnight guests. My grandmother kept a visitor's book of all the guests who were in their home. I inherited a rich heritage and many, many relatives who have been active in the RLDS church. For example, the Carl Mesley family, Susie and Bud Edwards, Dave Hazeltine, Stu Hanton, Steve Smith, Lawrence Orth, and of course Scott, and so many more. My paternal grandparents. My dad was born in New Boston, Illinois. My grandfather. My grandfather was born in 1856, before the start of the Civil War. Believe it or not, I never met him. He was 55 when my father was born. At some point, they made their home in Nauvoo. I do not know when. My grandfather and a nephew who lived with them died in the flu epidemic of 1920, leaving my grandmother with 7 children, 3 still in the home. My dad was 9 when he lost his father. My paternal grandmother was a Holmes, related to Reed Holmes, and died in 1952 when I was 4. My father, Elmer, needed at home to help with chores, only had an 8th grade education. However, he was self-taught and motivated to learn. He held many jobs, farming, milkman, picking up milk for the Nauvoo Blue Cheese Factory, and as a caretaker for 20 years at the Joseph Smith Historic Site in Nauvoo. He had a marvelous sense of humor and is often heard singing ballads like Who Threw the Trousers in Mrs. Murphy's Chowder and The Death of Floyd Collins. He was devoted to the RLDS church and often stated that the church family was his family. He was asked to pastor a small group in Carthage, 25 miles away from our home. He and my mother often spent 4 or 5 nights a week visiting and conducting cottage meetings with the Go, Ye, and Teach series. I often ran the slide projector and knew the story by heart. Eventually, a church was built in Carthage, and we had such notable members as the Stu and Patty McDowell family and the Rick Bunch family. Most notable of my relatives on my father's side are the Stevensons. My dad's sister married Dwayne, and Dwayne and my dad became great friends. We inherited a lot of cousins who we were close to. My dad liked home remedies. I can remember more than once having methylate painted on our throats, going out and finding chicken feathers when he mistakenly took ant poison, using ammonia to clear his stuffy nose. One of my favorite stories was when making a 5-gallon freezer full of ice cream, Mother put in limonite instead of vanilla. The bottles look the same if you buy them from Watkins. Unwilling to throw 5 gallons away, we ate it. It was cool going down, and then we were warm all over. He thought if someone else could make it, so could he. He tried making marshmallows. He tried making sauerkraut, ended up being a crock full of maggots and worms and crackers. I loved him dearly. My mother attended the very first youth camp the RLDS church ever held, and it was located in Nauvoo. She was there to witness the reinterment of Joseph and Hiram Smith, and school was allowed in Nauvoo so that they could attend that service. She attended Graceland. The first year Walker Hall was open, in 1930 and then graduated from Boston University with her bachelor's degree. She married at age 27. Most of her relatives thought she married way below her level. The same year her mother died. They bore 4 children under 5 years of age, between the ages of 34 and 39. She was a student of the scriptures and taught many, many Sunday school classes. My mother was a school teacher and returned to work when Kathy was 3. She was a leader in so many ways, women's leader at the congregation and district levels. She was extremely creative, open, and welcoming, following her parents' example of hosting ministers in our home. Yet every week, one of the men in the Nauvoo congregation sent her a letter criticizing her for being a poor mother because she worked outside the home. Because she worked outside the home, I grew up in a world where my parents shared household tasks and work in and outdoors. Certainly not the traditional model at that time. Very limited, liberated, and a great example. My story. You gotta have these on your. Okay, so you know. I was born in 1948, child number 3 in 4 years. We lived in Nauvoo, 2 or 3 blocks from the Nauvoo church. Mom and Dad, along with one of his brothers and one of his sisters, owned a souvenir shop and a gas station. I'm told that I was a hit because at age 3, I could add 3 columns of figures without writing anything down and could not be beaten at giveaway, a game played on a checkerboard. At age 3, we lived outside Nauvoo, and I can kind of remember it. There was a church and there were tombstones, a cemetery out there, but I couldn't see the tombstones, so I got glasses at age 3. In 1954, my dad gets a chance. Dwayne called him and said, there's a farm for rent in Lamoni. He always wanted to be a farmer, so we moved in that early spring. He moved with my older brother and sister so that they could attend school. Kathy and I remained in Nauvoo with my mother, who was teaching. We went out every weekend on the train to visit. In March, they found out I must attend kindergarten or Kathy and I would be in the same class. Kindergarten was required in Iowa, but not in Illinois. So I ended up staying with Dad and attended the one-room school, the Green School. And I wish I could find the picture of it. I know I have one, but I could not find my pictures. Located right across from the Evergreen Church. I had difficulty learning the alphabet. Every time the letter U came up, my quick response, not me, Kathy. There were a total of 14 people in the one-room schoolhouse, 3 of us in kindergarten. GMPs and Donovan Wardrip were my classmates. We were poor. The house did not have running water, but we did have electricity. We huddled around the pot-bellied stove in the winter, roasting on one side while freezing on the other. My bed was a pull-down couch in the living room that I shared with my sister. Saturday night was bath time with a large galvanized tub filled with water sitting in the middle of the kitchen floor. All 6 of us used the same water, bathing youngest to oldest. Dale and I sometimes argue who grew up the poorest. I think I win because only 2 of the houses I grew up in are still standing. The others have been torn down, not worth saving. In 1955, my dad contracts polio. We are isolated, having to get gamma globulin shots weekly. Even though the house was small, in my memory, it seemed that my parents' bedroom was down a long hallway with the door shut. We were not allowed to see him. Dad refused to go to Iowa City to be put in the iron lung. He believes the only reason he walked again was because of a chiropractor and treatments he received. I believe it was his own hard work with a blessing of healing from God. I can remember him walking the floor night after night when cramps overwhelmed him. Mom was teaching in Elston, Iowa, traveling on dirt roads. While my dad was convalescing, my mother had a hysterectomy. Life was hard. Our wonderful neighbors came in and got the crops out of the field, and then Dad had to give up farming, and we returned to Nauvoo. 1956. Dad worked at the Joseph Smith Historic Properties as a caretaker. My mother began teaching in Fort Madison, 20 miles away. She cried when she first saw the house located just a few blocks from the Joseph Smith homes. It was run down with 2 to 3 foot weeds surrounding the house and outbuildings. Again, no running water. I remember how pleased she was when Dad put in a septic tank and put in a kitchen sink and indoor bathroom. At age 8, the eye doctor recommended that I wear an eye patch to correct my lazy eye. I was to wear it all day And I hated it because I could not see. I threw such a fit that my parents finally gave up the battle. I promised them I would never blame them for my wandering eye. And to my credit, I never have. We lived on what was called the flats, the poor section of town. We were not like the town kids, wearing hand-me-down clothes, and my self-esteem fell further. In 1957, I was baptized in the Mississippi River by Bob Fishburne. I did not feel any different. Growing up in Nauvoo had a huge influence on my life. We were told that we were walking on holy ground, that we were to be perfect, to follow the word of wisdom, no beat in the summer, including camps and reunion, no coffee, no pop, no playing outdoors on Sunday, no playing with devil's cards. We heard stories of the sacrifices made by the saints and that we were to be like them. No smoking, no drinking, no dancing, but work, 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 and be humble. Of course, it was okay. We did not have friends. We were, after all, peculiar. Marry inside the church. Don't date someone unless you are willing to marry them, and be in constant prayer. Never mind, the only other young church members were my siblings or cousins. Then the stories of the ghosts haunting the mansion house. All in all, enough to scare any child to do anything but try to be good, which I wasn't. In 1961, I took my Presbyterian friend, I think we were freshmen in high school, to a reunion. And while I was leading recreation with a smaller age group, the teacher of the senior high class stated that the Presbyterian church was the church of the devil. Believe it or not, she did not come to any more of my church events. We did have some good times. We often played board games. I was 14 before I could beat my mother at Jack's. Bet I can still beat anyone here. If I can. And you wonder why I'm so competitive. Winning was everything. I got to see the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show and the moon landing, and unfortunately the death of President Kennedy. As you recall, very tumultuous times. We had 4 acres of land, a horse, 2 burros, cows, a dog, often puppies, a cat, and a parakeet. After Florence Orth lost her husband, my dad milked his cows morning and night and then went to her home and milked hers. I learned to milk a cow, but mostly spent time playing Monopoly with my cousin and Kathy. We would slide the board under the couch until the next milking. In 1963, my sophomore year in high school, at 15, we moved 9 miles down the river to a lovely home overlooking the Mississippi. It was in Hamilton, Illinois. At that home, you could see the Mississippi from every room in the house. It was right where the Mississippi bent. For the first time, I had my own room. It had a window seat, and I could see the Mississippi out my window. New lease on life. I no longer had to be that poor little girl from the flat. For the first time, I felt accepted and had a new start. I could be anyone I wanted. I remember standing on the dining room table singing as loud as I could when Leslie Gore came on the radio. You don't own me, so don't tell me what to do, and don't tell me what to say. I'm free and I love to be free. I'm young and I love to be young. So when I go out with you, don't put me on display. You don't own me. I would sing that to my mother. You know, whatever. I think she still owned me. I gained popularity. I was in the pep band, the jazz band, the marching band, the dance band, the concert band. I played the saxophone, E-flat saxophone, graduated 4th in my class, was a homecoming Queen candidate, and named a National Merit Scholarship semifinalist. One of my biggest disappointments was neither of my parents attended any of my concerts or other school activities. They were on church business. The next year, when I was 16, my sister began to have nightmares. She was afraid of ghosts and visits from the devil. I remember my parents telling her the devil only wants those who are good. I never had nightmares. All the more reason to stay away from God. I started dating. I had a Catholic boyfriend who treated me like a princess. He invited me to his 16th birthday party. His dad had to pick me up because neither of us were yet driving. Found out I was the only guest at that birthday party, and that he had a tugboat named after me. He worked and lavishly spent money on me. Every weekend, we either went to a movie or bowling, with many nights studying at my house. He started a band. He had long hair. Mom and Dad let them practice at our house with the speakers turned up as loud as they could. Wow. He started playing at dances. I stayed behind, only to learn later that he was drinking and doing light drugs. Never did he do that around me. I believe he really loved me much more than I did him. We broke up many times, but were soon back together. He agreed to attend senior high camp with me. Quite amazing for a young Catholic boy. And of course, that week, the class was on the rise and downfall of the Catholic Church. When everyone laughed about kissing the Pope's ring, he got up and left. Found out later that he walked down to the historic sites to find my dad to talk to him. Of course, he was kicked out of camp for leaving the grounds. Why, oh, why didn't I go with him? Of course, it was my training. We were at church whenever the doors were opened, or we were there to open them. I attended my first reunion when I was 2.5 months old, and every year after. Camps, often with my parents in attendance. Not willing to participate in testimony services, especially camp, where young people would get up, confess their sins, be forgiven, hugged, and then return to the same old ways. Not for me. So I just continued to feel worse and worse about myself, that I could be so judgmental and have so many flaws. I was quite aware of my shortcomings, and I would never be perfect. I had my first spiritual experience at reunion. For the first time, I felt the quickening in the bosom and knew I needed to get up and share. What was impressed on me was that God was not waiting for me to do huge, important things, but it was the little things that made the difference in others' lives. I did not stand up, but that testimony continues to live with me. In 1966, I'm 18 and a senior. Based on my math scores on the ACT, a recruiter from IBM comes to the house to invite me to become a computer programmer. I could come to St. Louis and within 6 months become a programmer. My mother had instilled in us, probably while we were still in the womb, that we would attend Graceland at least 1 year. In addition, I'm guessing she was reluctant to send her 18-year-old daughter to the big city. Most of my friends were attending the University of Illinois or Western Illinois University. And I told my mother I would attend Graceland my senior year. Yeah, she won. I attended Graceland that fall. During my senior year, this is for you, Paul, I met Dave Carmen, a freshman at Graceland, when he came to visit the Hetricks. I had an immediate crush, and when he and 3 friends rode motorcycles from Philadelphia to Nauvoo, I was overjoyed. We spent most every day together. Mom, not a big fan of the motorcycle, and my high school boyfriend, not a big fan of Dave. One afternoon, we were talking on a hillside in Nauvoo. Dave was digging around with a stick and hit what appeared to be a stone box. Unearthly music began to play. We were both freaked out and left. That spring, when prom came around and Doug and I were off again, I invited Dave to prom. He hitchhiked from Lamoni. We stayed out till 4 a.m. talking. My mother was out looking for us. I broke up with Doug for good before coming to Graceland, but alas, Dave had another girlfriend by then. I attended Graceland from 1966 to 1970. I found my friends for life, started as a math major, nearly flunked calculus with Jim Hawley, my advisor, and changed majors 7 times without Jim's approval. I fell in love with Ralph Bobbitt's Intro to Psych and eventually double majored in psychology and elementary ed. I now believe I love psychology because I was in search of myself. I added elementary ed because really, what can you do with a psych major? I felt my first stirrings of unfairness and gender discrimination when I had to drop out of computer science while carrying 21 hours student teaching and being a house president, and was told by the instructor when I took my drop slip in, girls never make it in my class. Even though I had 100% score and was helping any number of boys in the class, it still gets my blood boiling. I met Dale and dated off and on for 3 years. He was a really nice guy, but not my tall, dark-headed, million-hair man. He was a farm boy, for heaven's sakes, and had almost no dating experience. We were off and on, but broke up for good after our junior year. But he wrote me a really lovely letter, hoping I would have a great senior year, and could we get together when he arrived early for football? Well, I said, yeah, okay. And that was that. We started dating again. I had made a list of all the qualities I wanted in a husband, and guess who had every one of them? He had previously asked me to marry him twice before, and I had turned him down. He said he would only ask one more time, and then that was it. He didn't know I was ready to say yes, so we graduated and parted for the summer. Not being able to stand it, I sought him out at Guthrie Grove in July and asked him. I gained one of the most loving, wonderful families anyone could hope for. Is that him? In 1970, after I graduated, I went to graduate school. Since I was facing graduation without a plan, my good friend, Carol Lindgren, encouraged me to go to grad school with her. Knowing I had no desires to teach children, I say, save the children, and no marriage proposition in hand, she sent in my application. I was granted a scholarship with free tuition and a stipend. It was hard to say no to, although grad school was not in my sights. I attended Indiana State University, but found I was homesick for the very first time in my life. I wouldn't go home without telling my parents, but I couldn't reach them. When I talked to the dean, he asked me, what was wrong? Are you pregnant? Are you on drugs? He made me go see a counselor before I could leave. I forget that. I went, but decided on the way over, I would just stay at university. That night, my mom finally called and she said, the phone's been out all week. So anyway, that's how I got at graduate school. I saw Dale at homecoming and cried all the way back to Terre Haute. Dale gave me a diamond at Thanksgiving, and I cried so hard he came back with me for a week. We were married on New Year's Eve, and Dale moved to Terre Haute. At the time, Terre Haute was listed as number 4 in the nation for unemployment. Dale worked at a tulip factory, Burger King for a day, and finally at a gas station, all within 5 months. We had little money. My $150 stipend didn't stretch far when the rent was $125 a month. We worshiped with a small group and often read the hymns since there was no pianist. Paris and Katie Watts were there. Since Dale had not finished his degree, we were looking to return to Graceland. I was actually applying for teaching jobs. Yuck. When I received a call from Dave Hazeltine asking if I would consider putting my name in for the head resident position. He said Grace Eveling, my heroine, was leaving and they were going to replace her with a young person. I got the job, so we returned to the Hill in 1971 after being away just 1 year. I accepted with trepidation. After all, being a head resident was not on my list of things to do with my life, but mostly because I'd had a miserable year as HP. I felt that every time a student broke a rule, it was my fault and that I was not doing a good job. I still struggled with my self-esteem and put on a persona that everything was okay when I was dying inside with my failures and shortcomings. Even though I received an honorable mention for the student life area, I felt it was all a lie and people just did not know how bad I really was. So we moved into Tess Morgan the fall of 1971. My salary was $6,040 with $100 a month taken out for rent and no board privileges. Grace Eveling, who had been the head resident, left sticky notes all over with her advice and counsel. She was a wonderful woman, and I knew I could never live up to the way she did her job. She had told me that every night before she went to sleep, she went room by room in her mind and thought of the women who lived in that room and what she had witnessed with each of them. Then she prayed for each of us. Wow. One example. No wonder she was one of the first women called to the priesthood. We lived 5 years in Tess Morgan. David was born. Yes, he's in that one. We made sure with the dean that it was okay to get pregnant. David was due in July. I mean, they didn't have pregnant. Usually if you were pregnant, you were out of school, but the dean said it was okay. David was due July 13th, but did not arrive until August 9th. I was in labor 38 hours. I remember making the decision to just die. It was just too hard, and my contractions stopped. Attempting to get them going again, the doctor finally pulled him out with forceps, going through my uterine wall and giving David a black eye and a pointed head. He had a 1 on the APGAR, and I was in shock. At this point, 2 doctors were present, one for me, one for David. 9 pounds, 5 ounces. I remember Dale saying to me, no more children. And you might see how that worked out. I was sent home, a young mother who knew nothing, but luckily a husband who was experienced with babies. I was administered to and healed more quickly than anyone thought possible. 10 days after giving birth, I was at the HP training repeat, and Dale was at home alone with a tiny baby. The women at church were appalled that I would leave an infant so small. In 1976, When we decided to have another child, I wanted to quit my job. And my job was 24/7, and unfortunately, I often chose work over family. Dale was hired to be the hall director of Gunsolly and the annex. Then I was asked, would I work part-time supervising Patroness Hall, the units, and the Council of House Presidents? There I was, back in the thick of it all, really working full-time, getting paid 1/3 of my earlier salary. Kim, our first daughter, 9 pounds, 2 ounces, was blessed as well. At 1 month, she contracted bronchitis and quit breathing while I was home alone and Dale was up in the halls. I insisted we take her to the hospital. The doctor thought she might have spinal meningitis and said we could stay in Leon till morning or go to Des Moines. We chose Des Moines. I remember holding her and crying the whole way, worried if she would ever return. Prayers for her were offered at faculty meeting and I'm sure at many other places. She was finally again diagnosed with bronchitis. I'm not sure how many nights Dale slept in the rocker, holding Kim in an upright position so she could breathe easier. Me, I was just too uptight to do her any good. In 1980, after 3 years living in the annex, a new president, Frank Huff, was named. He made some major shifts. I was asked if I could come to the housing office and fulfill the duties of housing director until the end of the school year. I was asked to present to the executive council how I would strengthen the housing program. Scared spitless, I presented a 9-point plan, including the closing of Patroness, rotating brother and sister houses, etc. Every point was approved and I was asked to make them happen. Somehow that 3 months turned into 30 years. After 1 year of having me as a supervisor, Dale decided it was time to leave. Well, whatever. Never mind, Dave was school age and it broke my heart to see him outdoors with his ball and bat waiting to be invited to play with the college men. We bought a home and after 9 years in the residence halls, we moved out. Dale was employed as a deputy in the Decatur County Sheriff's Office and I continued to work in the housing office. I again became pregnant. In January, Newell Yates, Dean of Students, was diagnosed with lung cancer. He had surgery and 6 weeks later returned to work. We had Chris, our third child, 10 pounds, 2 ounces, the weekend before he returned. I was on maternity leave for 6 weeks. When I returned, it was obvious that Newell was not well. He was the first person who ever spoke to me very honestly about death. He said there was no cure for him. I performed many of the duties behind the scene, especially that summer. He often had to go to Des Moines to have fluid removed from his abdomen. He told me the last hope he had was in Houston. 4 of us met to plan how to start the school year in case Newell was unable to perform his normal duties. When Newell returned, we were told to leave him alone while he recovered. The president met with us and said he had made some decisions. Orville Hiles, who had worked in the area the longest, would take charge of student services, and Rick Bunch would handle student concerns. He was not sure who could handle discipline. But Edie and I left that meeting, both of us upset and hurt. Both of us had more experience and been in the area longer, but understood for the first time we were merely women. Later, after talking to Newell, the president came by my table in the Commons during the student leader retreat to tell me, Newell said I was the best one to handle discipline. This was never publicly announced. After Newell died in mid-September, Orville was named acting dean of services and I was named acting dean of students. I was paid an additional $150 a month for these extra duties. Orville would attend executive council and board meetings, and the staff asked that I run student life meetings. This was my year from hell. My biggest frustration was I had no way to get student opinions to those making decisions. I had no say on the budget and other administrative duties. I cried myself to sleep so many nights that Dale finally convinced me to talk to the president. Giving him credit, he did add me to the executive council and provided me with the budget info, etc. I was overwhelmed with the responsibilities that were mine, trying to keep 2 offices running and feeling like there was never enough time to do everything needing done. It was evident that the House presidents were feeling the slight. For example, at the Spring House President Retreat, I thought it would be a good idea to let the House presidents express their frustrations about the year. They let me have it. We had planned to follow it up with a sharing session of what we appreciated about each other. I started to cry when this part started and I could not stop. You may remember the John Taylor song, "You've Got a Friend." The lyrics go, "When you're down and troubled and you need some love and care and nothing is going right, close your eyes and think of me, and soon I will be there to brighten up even your darkest night. You just call out my name and you know wherever I am, I'll come running to see you again. Winter, spring, summer, or fall, all you have to do is call and I'll be there. You've got a friend." I was still crying the next morning, and as you can imagine, no one knew what to do. But don't forget God's mysterious ways. He was the friend I needed. We left, me still crying, but got caught at noon at the Minnesota-Iowa border with the closing of the interstate due to a blizzard. We had to pull off. I had to once again pull myself together and be in charge. Because I wasn't smart enough to book a hotel room, we ended up in a building owned by the Salvation Army. The woman who met us was in full regalia. We put up our army cots and they began to make dinner from our leftover supplies for other stranded motorists. By 9 o'clock, when the road reopened, we were again a unified group and my mojo was back. That spring, when we thought a new vice president for student affairs was going to be named at a plenary, we got the news that we had a new president, Barbara Higdon, and the search for the new VP would begin again. Early that summer, in 1984, Tom Powell was named VP for Student Life and Dean of Students. He immediately asked me to be Associate Dean of Students and Director of Housing and gave me a $10,000 raise. I found out earlier that I was the second lowest paid person in the entire Student Life area. When you start at $6,000 and add 3% a year, it doesn't go up very fast. I'm just saying. Tom won me over immediately. He and I worked well together and spent 25 years in our respective roles. Another one of my heroes. He calmed me down and stopped the horses, and I fired him up to make changes. No one stopped Tom when he was on a roll. Students and staff alike adored him. In 1985, my father, who had been diagnosed with bone cancer and Alzheimer's, mother was concerned that Dad was not safe on their 10-acre homestead. She and Dad moved to Lamoni next door to us in the fall of '84. 1 year later, my dad died, the same day my mother had quadruple bypass heart surgery. Dad was at the Independence Regional Health Center for 17 days before dying. Another God moment. I had asked my mother if she wanted to know when Dad died. In her typical fashion, she said, "Of course, I want to know, but don't wake me to tell me." He died shortly after she was out of surgery, and there's no way we could tell her. When I told her the next morning, she said, "I know, he was here with me." Later, she had no recollection of that experience, but it was extremely comforting to us. In 1987, on February 8th, I was called to Tess Morgan by the hall director, who was so distraught she could not talk. For some reason, I did not go until Tom could go with me. What a blessing. What we found when we got there was a dead baby. Because of the news coverage, Tom asked that I go to the jail with Rick Bunch to see Dina Gaines. Dale had been told that he could not talk to me about the case if he wanted to work on it at all. It was the first time I experienced the strength of denial and the power of a dysfunctional family. The mother and sister were at the sheriff's office when Dina was brought from the hospital. I was the only one who spoke to Dina and gave her a hug. On April 1, the hall director left without notice, and Tom and I took turns staying in Tess Morgan, trying to help the women who were there. Another God moment. Tom asked me who I knew that could come for the rest of the year. I didn't know. He said, "How about Grace Ebling, who you love?" I called her. Excuse me, lost a page. No. Oh, no, maybe I don't have her. Oh, here she is. And she said yes when I told her I would take care of all the administrative demands. We just needed her. It is my testimony that when she came, it was like she was a grandmother sitting in the middle of the Tess Morgan lounge. She opened her arms and brought comfort to many of the broken hearts. I was doing too much. I had attended a workshop where the woman talked about all the balls we have in the air at any one time. She said, "Be careful. Some balls are wood balls and some are glass. Be careful which ones you drop." Unfortunately, some of the balls I was dropping were indeed glass balls and mostly had to do with my family. I was overwhelmed with the demands of my position and the emotional toil. I was a workaholic. but a rageaholic at home. I went through the days smiling and laughing with people at work and yelling and frustrated with my family at home. I was very unhappy, but could not figure out why. I'm sure at this point I was depressed, but covering it up. I was very far from God because I knew he knew who I really was, a sinner, a fraud. I was afraid the God of judgment had judged me and found me wanting. Until I got things right, I did not feel that I had any right to go to my Creator. I was spiritually and emotionally dead. I was going through everyday motions, but with no joy. Peace was far from me. Listen to one of the poems I wrote during this dark time. I'm tired. I can't pretend much longer. I'm fraying around the edges, making it more and more difficult. Soon I will completely unravel. Do I have to? Is that the way out? To die? To lose myself? The paradox, die so I can live? Well, I am close to death. I can feel it claiming me, calling me. Maybe I shouldn't resist, but fall noiselessly, sensibly into its grip, trusting, believing that life might now begin. And one more. Why so hopeless? Why so dark? God has promised light and peace. Am I so stubborn and so sure that I can't see the hand that waits for me? I'm broken, but desire to be whole. Can you reach a little lower and rescue me? Oh God, can you hear my plea? At some point, I quit attending church, and I did not want to risk a call to the priesthood when I knew I was completely unworthy. I'm sorry to say, no one came to visit me or ask me why I no longer attended. The only priesthood visit I do remember ever having was when Dale was in the hospital with a kidney stone. I was taking care of his job. He was in a head resident over at Annex Gunsolly, my job at the housing office, and I had 2 young children at home. The stake president and one of his counselors asked if they could come see me. They asked about Dale, but then said they were really there to confront me about spreading rumors about one of the VPs who I said was having an affair. I was shocked. It was the first time I'd ever heard this rumor, and it came from the 2 of them. Later, it turned out that the source was a Gilpatrick, but someone changed it to Killpack, and I got blamed. Even though this was cleared up, I never received an apology. Another day when I was leaving the office, a policeman pulled up just as I was leaving. The officer said he was there to take me to the hospital, that Dale had been in an accident. Traffic was backed up before we got to Leon, but he was able to get us through. I found out a car had pulled in front of Dale on his way home, and the woman and man were being life-flighted to Des Moines. They were assessing whether Dale needed to go too. The woman died before the helicopter arrived. Dale remained in the hospital suffering from a broken wrist and other injuries. I received many calls from the Leon and Lamoni community, letting me know they appreciated Dale and wanted to wish him their best. Not one church member called or visited. The family did not hold Dale responsible and asked him to be a pallbearer. Tough times. Remember, I said God works in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. Kathy, my sister, checked herself into a treatment center for bulimia. The family was expected to come. It changed my life. A recovering drug addict, a recovering alcoholic, and an Irish Catholic woman brought me to Jesus. I fought her every step of the way. She saw me and would not accept my tricks and my humor to get me out of tough situations. I totally broke down when she called me out in the front of a group full of people, also there because of addicted members in their own families. It has always been impossible for me to identify the exact moment when I truly broke down and admitted I could no longer carry the heavy load of guilt, shame, and unworthiness that I felt. I had believed for years that my sister's problems were my fault. I finally had to admit the burden was too heavy. I could no longer keep up my pretenses. The truth was out, and I was not the person I pretended to be. But sometime during that 3-day experience, I met my Savior, Jesus Christ. I did not have the words to describe the experience, but I knew with an surety that God had been patiently waiting for me. Christ welcomed me with open arms and spoke to my heart. I have been waiting for you to let the burden down, to come to me and let me carry it for you. I knew that I was loved and that Christ had died for me. For me. I was filled with peace and love and joy. I was whole again. I understood without a doubt that I too was fearfully and wonderfully made. I was no longer dead, but alive. I understood it's not so much about what we do, but the reason we do them that matter. I was born again. I was alive. Did all my problems and concerns disappear? No, but it set me on the path to healing. I went to counseling in Creston for my own codependent behaviors and met with the campus minister, Paul Sears, another one of my heroes, who patiently listened to me even when I had nothing to say. During this time, Everett Graffio agreed to give me an evangelist blessing, something I put off earlier because I did not want to hear what God had to say to me. After the blessing, Everett said, "Blessing is healing, or healing is blessing." I still don't know. In 1988, David found and married Jen. There's that picture from you. You don't have these. Here you go. Okay, let's see, got Dave married off. Let's see. What a blessing. Kim is a senior in the nursing program at Independence. Chris is a sophomore in high school. Kim kept coming home on the pretense of watching Chris play basketball, but she kept hanging around. I finally asked her if there's something she needed to talk about. She was silent, but for some reason I asked her, "Are you pregnant?" She broke down and said she did not want to tell us because she knew it would disappoint us. Trust me, after what we had been through with Dina Games, the young mother who killed her baby in the residence halls, I was horrified that she had not felt comfortable to come to us. I knew she needed us more then than at any other time in her life. Again, race discrimination raised its ugly head. A woman told Dale how sorry she was that our daughter was pregnant by a Black man. She said, "You know, they are never right." Good things she did not say that to me. 6 weeks later, on December 27th, Brittany was born. Miranda was at Graceland and Kim in her last semester of nursing school. We invited Miranda and Britt to live with us. What a blessing that turned out to be. 12 days later, Dale was shot. It was a Friday, and I was just leaving work to get home so we could attend Chris's basketball game in Lineville. The phone rang in my office, and when I answered, a woman said, "I don't know if I should be the one to tell you, but your husband has been shot." And she hung up. I couldn't think, but finally said, "I need to call the sheriff's office." They only said, "He wants you to meet him at the hospital." I was relieved to know that he was alive and talking. I left driving about 90 miles an hour, watching police cars speed the other direction. I decided to let them try to catch me, but I still got to Leon too fast, in time to see the blood spurting from his eye. Dr. Easter said he was transferring Dale to Des Moines. He thought there was metal in his eye. I called the children and Dale's brother. I started to follow the ambulance, but it was going too fast. I decided to slow down, thinking the children deserved at least one parent. I did not know there had been a bank robbery until I saw it on the news in Des Moines. The staff was very supportive and kept the media and phone calls away. Kim and Miranda picked up Chris and arrived at the hospital. Dan and Kitty Martin also came. At this point, Dale was in shock. The doctor told me he was not sure about the eye, but if it was anyone I loved, he needed to go to Iowa City. An ambulance took him. I waited for Dale's brother and sister-in-law. I wasn't sure I could make that trip. The eye doctor reported the eye was gone and would have to be removed when I got there. Saturday, the next morning, they planned to remove the eye, but Dale's heart went into AFib. They had hoped it would return to natural rhythm on its own, so surgery would wait. Members of the family arrived. Carolyn and Dick Otis, residents of Iowa City, found us thanks to a call from Carla Ferguson, a hall director. They fed 18 of us in their home and asked me to stay with them. Sunday, they were ready to shock Dale's heart when it returned to its own rhythm. Surgery was scheduled for Monday morning. Monday, Dale's mother dies. The family did not want me to know until Dale was taken to surgery because they were afraid Dale would find out. I had to tell him and the children after he was out of surgery. Again, the hospital monitored all calls and kept the media away. I did not want a mic thrust in my face asking how I felt about my husband being shot. When the doctor was out of surgery, he handed me a little vial and said, "This is why your husband is still alive. The shell of the bullet has split, and it was a shell that was resting against the last bone before the brain." He said, "Have them check. That bullet is in the car." And it was a miracle. The outpouring of support from family, church members, the Graceland family, the Lamoni community, and law enforcement were what held us up. It was as if a safety net had been placed around us and we could not fall. Tuesday, we returned home to media vehicles circling the town and our street. I did not want to talk to them, but Dale said to do it so they would go away. I met them at the door and told them they could talk to Dale, but if I saw him or any of my family on TV, I would sue them. They must have believed me because that night only a picture of flowers and cards were seen. Wednesday, we traveled to Logan, Iowa, for his mother's visitation and funeral on Thursday. On Friday, Chris blows out her knee at the basketball game. I couldn't move. Tom Carroll announces the bank robbers have been apprehended in Texas. My mother asked me, what can she do? And I tell her, don't die. Luckily, she hung around for another 2 years. Dale was home for 3 months before returning to his position as Lamoni chief. He often took care of Brittany and was often seen strolling her downtown. We took her to Chris's ball games, and many people held a Black child for the very first time in their lives. I was so proud of Kim. She finished her degree. There you go. Coming to Lamoni whenever possible to take care of the baby, and somehow passed her boards that summer. 2000. As long as I have known Dale, my biggest hero, he has been drawing designs for houses. I did not care where I lived. I had a roof over my head and an indoor bathroom. When I realized I might have lost him, I decided I could no longer stand in the way of his dreams. So I agreed to build our new home. He designed it himself, and I love it. I haven't really spoken much about my job. I loved it. I met my love of math, budgets in the millions, and it met my need to be with people, my extroverted side. I met and worked with so many wonderful people. I read once that people do not come into our lives by accident. Each of them have something to teach us. Based on the number of people I have known, I had a lot to learn. I worked with tremendous hall directors, Betty Winholtz, Brad Carr, Diana Jones, Mike Seagraves, Ivan Joseph, Travis Harder, Curtis Harper, Deb Simpson, Amber Simpson, Casey Courtney, Nate Wood, and Jared Doty, to name a few. Co-workers included campus ministers Lee Fole, Everett Graffio, Rick Bunch, Paul Sears, Bill Williams, Blake Smith, Chandra Newcomb, and Dave and Dusty Hines. Other co-workers, Carl McGuire, Nancy Wallace, Ed Shields, Christy Dickerson, Karita Yunke, Jan Gray, Charlie Reddick, Janae Abriel, and too many others to name, let alone to remember. I worked with Benita Booth, Janice Tiffany, Greg Sutherland, Bob Farnham, David DeBarth, Ralph Waters, Ron Harmon, and so many more. I had worked with over 800 house presidents. I taught leadership workshops using as a theme, Leadership Secrets of Attila Hun. I even dressed up like him. Jesus Christ, CEO, and Pirates of the Caribbean with a 35-pound chicken, parrot, on my shoulders, sprinkled fairy dust and challenged students to be bold. I closed Patronus and then Walker when enrollment figures were down to keep the house system strong. I disbanded houses and started new ones. I was there for the renovation of Walker, the tearing down of the units, and the building of the new apartments. I helped students abolish hours. I put screens on the men's halls, windows, they hated it, and began locking the men's halls at the same time as the women's. I must say, not all my decisions were popular. I was responsible for handing out consequences when students were caught breaking the rules inside and sometimes outside the residence halls. When we saw a sign that said, F you, Killpack, we figured if it was on campus, it was for me. If it was off campus, it was for Dale. We were on call 24/7. When the phone rang late at night, Dale would hand it to me. And I always told him, it's for me. I'm guessing you will be involved as well. Often the case. In 2005, Chris meets Luis, there you go, her future husband from Venezuela. We decided to allow him to live with us after that first summer. Chris was in grad school at the University of Iowa, and Luis did not have the funds to remain at Graceland. We did not know if they would marry, but we decided we could live with helping someone get a college degree. In 2009, Luis and Chris marry in Las Vegas. Sorry, Mom. It's a beautiful wedding. Minister spoke both Spanish and English, and the wedding was broadcast, so Luis's parents were able to see it from Caracas. Our family became the world. How much we learned from our in-laws and our stud-in-law. Kim never married Marian. In 2009, Tom was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. When I heard, I cried to Dale that I could not go through that again, but somehow I did. What a courageous fight Tom put up. He died close to 1 year from the day he learned of his diagnosis. He went down fighting it the whole way. He was in the office on a Friday and died the following Thursday, on January 28th of 2010. It was difficult to speak at his memorial service, but I had to try to put into words what he had meant to me. One of his sons-in-law said to me after the service that he saw Tom standing right behind me, offering his full support, as he had always done. In 2011, my brother, who had been diagnosed with early onset dementia at the age of 62, died from a massive heart attack at age 66. He used to call me every Sunday night to talk. How I miss those times. Later that summer, my sister's husband died from leukemia. In 2010, I was named Dean of Students and kept up my job with housing. I was only able to do it because of the tremendous support I had. When it became apparent that it was going to be difficult to fill Tom's position, I agreed with the president to become the vice president of student life and dean of students. I hired Deb Skinner as the housing director. I retired on May 31, 2014, after working at the university 43 years. Okay, retirement. This is what they gave me. Love it, absolutely love it. And they also made a mindset. This is the things, kind of the history while I was at Graceland, what was going on in the world and what went on at Graceland. Let's see. Okay, retirement. I love the word. At this point, 5 of our grandchildren were born. 3 to Dave and Jen, and 2 to Kim and Miranda. And Chris was pregnant with her first. Go ahead and send that down. Dale retired in 2010 after serving 30 years in law enforcement. We traveled a lot the first few years, and we were able to babysit our newest granddaughter when Chris had to return to work. I took up quilting. Back on this back wall, you'll see a quilt that I just finished. It's not even been bound yet, but I just got it last night from Mary, and spent a lot of time reading. I joined 6 clubs and spent quality time with 7 growing grandchildren who all are very gifted academically and athletically. In 2020, Britt graduated from Buena Vista University and headed to Miami, Florida for her master's degree. In 2021, we celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary, even though it was our 51st anniversary. Thank you, pandemic. We had planned to go on a cruise, but instead, because those all got canceled, we got all the family together at the South Padre Islands. In 2023, Dave and Jen's oldest, after graduating from Graceland, is married to a high school sweetheart and moves to Baltimore, while Tyler finishes his military service in the Air Force. Now they are now back in Missouri, close to Dave and Jen. Lainey, Dave and Jen's second, is a senior at Central Missouri University on a full scholarship for softball. Britt and Isaiah have moved to Honolulu. Britt is pursuing her doctoral in psychology. Isaiah is working as an electrician, hoping to become a master electrician in the next several years. Colston is 17, a junior at Killpack High School. Mia is a 4th grader, she's 10, and Max, our wonderful all-boy 2-year-old. When I attended Graceland, I was impressed by Harry Ashenhurst's grandfather, who sent Harry $5 every Friday without fail. I said that when I had grandchildren, I would do the same. And I do, although inflation has now made that $20 each week. I only send it to them while they are in college. My husband, my children, and their spouses, and my grandchildren are now my glass balls. I don't plan on dropping any of them. In conclusion, I want to read what I wrote when I gave my last lecture. They used to have a last lecture series at Graceland, and I was one of the speakers one time. The title of my lecture was Secrets. And I finished this way. I do believe in miracles, and I believe you are one, just like I am. It is my undying testimony to know without a doubt that every person I meet has value and worth in the sight of God. And it is not my responsibility to judge, but to love and help others in any way I can. The Lord is my shepherd. My cup overflows. And I know with a surety that goodness and mercy have followed me all the days of my life. And I want to share the most important 3 secrets I have learned. Secret 1, I am not different than anyone else. I belong to the human race. We are the same. I am you and you are me. We share the same needs and the same desires, and we are already perfect, made in God's image. Secret 2, I can choose to change my life. I am not powerless. I do not have to be a victim. I can choose to live. And finally, secret 3, the most powerful secret of all, Christ lives. I am loved, and so are you. These 3 secrets have made all the difference in my life. Oh, you did tell me wedding picture.
Yeah, it went,
Oh,
this is,
yeah, that's a picture.
of
This
Kim.
is a family picture, but guess who got called out just as they were ready to take the picture? So it's a family picture without Dale. That's it. That's all I got.
Nice.
Any questions?
Yeah, any questions?
I do, but I'll save them for patio.
Yeah, there you go. Yes, one of the things I enjoy every time is so much is living next door to these 2 wonderful people. I get to spend a lot of time over there and I love it. And going to lunch with that person.
You mentioned Frank came in 80. He actually came in 79.
79, okay.
The reason I know that is I was teaching assistant and I graduated in 79.
And that's when you said when your mom came? What'd you say? What
I
was that?
don't know who was after Frank.
Well, Frank came in 79.
He came in,
Yeah, yeah.
Was that Johanna?
Yeah.